everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on rashpixel.fm. I'm Pete Wright, and right over there is Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hello, Nikki.
Hello, Pete.
Very excited for our show today, mostly because our guests actually did all the work. We just had to show up. And I love that. We're talking to James and Jules. They're back on the show. Before we turn over to them, though, you know,
yay!
Yay! And there was much celebrating. You know the drill. Head over to Take Control ADHD. Get to know us a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there on the website or subscribe to our mailing list. Right on the homepage, you'll get an email every time a new episode is released. You can connect with us on Twitter or Facebook at Take Control ADHD. And if you support the ADHD podcast, if you're a longtime listener and find your life has been impacted positively by something we've done over the past 6 years, I hope you'll consider supporting us with just a few dollars a month on Patreon. If you were a Patreon supporter right now, you would be in a live stream with our guests and me and Nikki, watching this recording live, asking questions if you have them, and joining us in real time. And that's really fun. It's just one of the perks that you get for joining up with us on Patreon. Patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. It has been enormously heartwarming to watch that group grow. And so thank you, everybody, for supporting us. Okay. James and Jules, they're back. The other dynamic podcasting duo in ADHD have just wrapped their first season of The Complex, a podcast that approaches ADHD through the lens of a fictional apartment complex and its many ADHDer residents. They're here today to share a bit about their experience and lessons learned in approaching the ADHD community through a podcast platform. James and Jules, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Pete, yes, and Pete, I find it so intriguing that I hear finishing the first season.
Yeah.
You know, a little bit of foreshadowing going on here, maybe.
I'm not going to lie to you. I'm loading that up. I'm going to be leaning in on that foreshadowing. I know when you were here last time, you were hesitant about what you were going to do for your next season. I'm through with you being hesitant. You had a great first season,
We're
so
pushing you
screw
forward.
it. You need to be doing another season. Talk to your financiers and let's make that happen.
Okay. Well, I'm blushing if people can't see it. I'm like, okay, yeah, we definitely have lit a fire here, and there's it's a very fun way to find out about ADHD and how to manage it, and it's just been phenomenal. We've had we have a great time here.
The second season would definitely be a lot easier to do because we've
production
already done it.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're on Pete's side already.
I mean, hey,
I am not above piling on, man.
It's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. And yes,
and it's a great way to get information out there, and it's a great way to engage with all kinds of different people.
Well, it is, and it's a great way to get information across and strategies. And as you were saying earlier, Nikki, it's the afterthought shows have turned out to be this really rich conversation between Jules and I, and it's really where I have found I am best. Well, you put me in front of a camera that I know I'm on a stage, and I start going into auto robot mode, and I completely lose my hands and my facial expressions go blank, and a knitted eyebrow, and my wife's like, "Where did you go?" So you have to catch me candid, you know, and Jules has been really good at helping me just be candid. So it's been a whole lot of fun.
It is very informational. And as I was telling you before we started recording, I'm going to go back and listen as a coach and write some notes down because I'm getting some nuggets there that, you know, I didn't know about or I wasn't as aware of. And so it's so informational, and I love the format that you guys use because
thank you.
It's great. And I got to admit, I like the acting part being only about 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Because you can kind of see what the issue is, but you don't really see it or hear it until you guys talk about it in the afterthoughts. So it's just a perfect division too of how you spend your time. You know,
I got a question. I got to kick off this first question, and it is about the ADHD stuff, not so much about the podcast. I am curious for both of you, if you find that you learned something new about ADHD in the process of communicating in this way about ADHD.
I would say that my initial thought on that is, one, I had no idea what it felt like to be understood at the level of the disruption of distress that I had internally. But doing a project that was this deep and vulnerable and authentic with my son, who got to work with me professionally, he grew up with me, he gets to watch this distress of mine and what I go through. There has been a validation and a relaxation inside me I don't think was there. And I'm an expert in this, and I've been playing with it for years. But as for those who have ADHD, it's such a rare occasion, maybe outside of a counseling session or with someone who really understands it. Do they really, really get it? Do they really stress that it creates in your life? And so I'm actually in the middle of a bit of a transformation reflection period of like, wow, I've never had something like this. So I did not expect that to come from this podcast, Pete. Not at all.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I've been around it my whole life, and so I've seen the different strategies that that my dad has built, and the different techniques and everything, and I've heard him talk about it, but I've never really seen their implementation, and I've never seen them in action. And kind of like what he was saying, I got to see him use them, and I got to see him go through these distresses and these different, kind of storms, really, that's what they were, and use these different techniques to calm himself down and recenter. And then literally, an hour later, go talk about it on a podcast in relation to a character that we wrote about. That was a very strange dichotomy, because it was like, it was morphing real life and fictional. And it was hard at times to distinguish between the two.
Our fiction is now our reality. Is that what you're telling me, James?
Yeah.
Every week I hear you, Jules in particular, and I wonder at what point is he going to come back on the show and says, well, thanks to the complex, I now have ADHD.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it sometimes. It's interesting because I have characteristics of ADHD.
Sure. As we all. That's the nature of the spectrum disorder, right?
So I'll find myself doing work. I'll be doing 4 different projects at once. I'll literally, be doing one thing, and then like the page is taking too long to load, so I'll jump to a totally different project. And I'm doing these things, and I'm like seeing myself as like Genius Boy, or I'm seeing myself as like one of these people in the complex, and I'm like, oh God, what's happening?
Then you step back and realize that page only took about 6 seconds to load, right, and you had already moved on. Yeah, no, I totally get that. Right.
Exactly. Well, and Jules, I have to tell you, because you and I are in the same situation, I don't have ADHD either, but there are times where I'm like, do I? Because I need to think about what I would tell my client in the situation that I am in right now so that I can get through it. Like, how do I break this down? How do I, so you're thinking it through just like I would be talking to somebody else, because I don't know. I mean, it's just, it doesn't rub on you, but it's so much part of your life that it's just there. And my husband always teases me because he's like, are you sure you don't have it? And I'm like, are you sure you don't?
Yeah, I was going to say, your husband comes from a space of unique intimacy with that question.
Yes. Yeah. He took the test and won't tell me what the result is.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
Interesting.
Yes. Wow. I think you've determined the results is what I'm seeing.
You don't need a test for that.
No.
And it's not, that's not my attempt to do any third party diagnostic.
That's right.
Just observation.
I heard that in one of your afterthoughts.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
That was actually a very, I think good kind of mistake that happened was like in the script writing, we mislabeled one of the characters, and so we said that they were I think it was Crispy, right? Mm-hmm. We said that Crispy was hyperactive when he was really inattentive, and that's what we said in the episode, and it really just kind of displayed perfectly, like, you can't have a third party diagnosis, even if it's a spouse, like talking about the symptoms of this person and like talking about all these different things that they go through. A therapist can't diagnose off of that. Like, that is something that's really, really important to know as audience members that are listening to this kind of thing, is that, this is not a diagnostic tool. It is a way for us to get information about ADHD out there so that you can maybe, have the curiosity to go and get tested or go and have this information figured out.
So you bring up a really good point, because that was one of the questions that I wanted to review, because I didn't write it down. In that particular episode, you really went into more detail about what inattentive ADHD looks like.
Yeah.
And you had the percentages of the 3 different types of ADD. And I don't remember, was it 5% that is inattentive?
It's 10% as a general rule, 5% is hyperactive impulsive, and 85% is combined type.
Okay. So what I thought was so interesting about that is that we did an inattentive show just a few weeks ago with another therapist. And we did that show because we had a lot of listeners that came in and said, I really want to talk more about inattentiveness. And it was so interesting to me that you connected the motivation piece to that, because that's what they were all looking for. They all had that piece that I don't know how to get motivated. Do you mind just kind of talking a little bit on that?
No, I don't at all, because I think it's probably one of the most significantly, I don't know if misunderstood, it's just not well understood on the inattentive spectrum that I talk about. Sure, the focus and concentration is disrupted from a neurochemical, neurodevelopmental, neurological point of view. But motivation is the one that really is, I talk about it like sand in your hand. You try to grip it and it just gets less and it starts falling out and you can't, and it was there yesterday and suddenly it's just kind of like the wind, it disappears. And so when you tell someone with the inattentive type of ADHD this, they go, wow, no one's ever explained that to me, but that's exactly what's happening to me, is that I was motivated 10 minutes ago and now I'm not, and my mom's wondering, or my wife is wondering, or my boss is wondering why I'm staring off into space again. But I had it. So to access motivation in that space, and maybe a little bit longer of a conversation, partly of what I'm getting ready to go into, I'm developing a video education series that we're releasing in May, which is me really going through the theoretical depth on a lot of my concepts and the way that things set up. And in this case, motivation, you have to resource it from such a personal meaning point of view, of something that activates a sense of interest. It activates a neurological burst of excitement, of something that you feel like pulled toward. And so the personalization is the real key, Nikki, because there are more than, a few thousand or more books, right, on how to motivate yourself. But there aren't a lot of books that are going to say, oh, the motivation has to come from the inside out. You have to determine it. And when you're motivated, it's not hard to tell. Meaning it will pick up a burst of energy. So a case in point, I was recently discussing the ideas of motivation on the inattentive spectrum. Okay. And this person was having a very difficult time in school. This was a young adult, really staying motivated with professors, with boring routine tasks. And in conversation, I'm always looking for where their passion is. Where's your natural interest in life? What naturally grabs you? And here was a child who loved computer games from 5 years old on, even taught himself to read in some perspective by having to play computer games and read the instructions. And so I said, what if you layer that passion and interest and your, I think it was a chemistry class, your chemistry class suddenly became a video game? What if it became the analysis of a video game? And the look on his face was like, I never thought of that. Right. I never thought about trying to resource motivation through something that's naturally interesting to me. Yeah. And sometimes that layover as it would be a strengths-based kind of model as we might know it in the ADHD world. But so motivation, a lot of personal interest, a lot of personal meaning. It's a neurological burst of energy, of excitement, and there's 10,000 ways to get to it. but they all have to be resourced from the inside out. And so you really have to personalize the strategies around it. Does that help?
Absolutely. And which is really the theme that I've listened to is that personalization. Personalize. Yep. It seems, I mean, that's the key is what I'm getting.
Well, there's never going to be one path that works for everybody.
Right.
And I think that's especially true with ADHD. There's not one method that can be like, this will work for all ADHD people, because there's such a wide spectrum of symptoms and ways that people interact with their own ADHD. The fact that you can go from people who completely lose their motivation and really don't are almost just kind of sitting there and not doing anything, to people who are hyperactive and literally bouncing off the walls, and everywhere in between that in and of itself can show you just how wide the spectrum of ADHD is. And taking this view of personalizing it for that person is really the only way that is going to be ever effective.
Well, and I was just going to say, I think that takes the pressure off of people too, because I think that one of the things I see so many times with my clients is that all or nothing. Well, if this didn't work exactly the way it told me it was going to work, then I guess it just doesn't work for me.
Right.
And
exactly.
and then they start feeling that shame and something's wrong with me. Yeah. And so so I think
here comes the emotional distress syndrome,
exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Right.
And so, but I'm going to give a spoiler alert here again, okay? Because it's really key on the personalization. So, the personalizing of strategies has become so near and dear to me because I certainly have given recommendations and have seen the 20 strategies on multiple psychological testings, and they don't make any sense to anyone. So that's what kind of bore out this sense that it's got to be personalized. But even in personalization, we know the aspect of being consistently inconsistent. Sometimes things work and then they don't. Yeah. So like motivation, going through my hand like sand, my motivation or my personal strategy could work for 2 weeks, and then I'm not interested in it anymore. So I also want to let people know that when you personalize a strategy, it doesn't mean it's going to last forever. It's going to last until you're interested in it, and then when you're not, you're not.
Right.
But and that's okay.
And you have to be willing to change it and keep adapting.
Yeah.
You do. And so the ability to be adaptable and move with it, I think you're right. If you give people that information, there's a sense of relaxation that comes from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Great.
I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on what, back to the podcast in particular, as you're talking about some of these issues, did anything surprise you in terms of what your listeners connected with the most?
I think, it's interesting because we didn't have a ton of listener interaction. And I think that's for a few reasons. I think it's partly because we didn't have a great space for them to come and interact with. So we didn't have a Facebook page, or we didn't have anything like that.
I noticed your Facebook page sprung up.
We do
recently.
We do now. We put it up in the last.
That was one piece of feedback from someone. Hey, get a Facebook page up. I'm like, hey, what a great idea!
Man, why didn't we think of that? Right. And so that was, one of the major reasons. And also, people don't necessarily want to put their comment in a review or something like that.
So I think that's probably the biggest key to me. Pete, did you finish?
No, yeah.
The biggest piece was it kicked up, and what I heard and I heard this more locally from clients listening to it and things like this around my practice, was it emotionally authentic and validating to them, that it was like they were listening to their own homes, they were listening to their own conversations. And so it was like looking in a mirror, and it wasn't necessarily shame or embarrassment. It was just like, oh my God, that's exactly what happens to me. And so there is a degree of exposure that someone's not ready to kind of show that part of themselves. But I will tell you, and I think I may have mentioned this in an email to y'all, that I did have one story where a family listened to the podcast on a road trip, where 3 out of 4 in the family have a diagnosis of ADHD. And they laughed about it. They were able to talk about the afterthoughts and the strategies. And the spouse who was diagnosed ADHD would look over at his spouse he was married to, and he would say, God, this is exactly what happened. She would roll her eyes and go, yep. But it became this way of a camaraderie and a communion between the family to discuss it, which really lets out the stress to a degree. So I do think it's the emotional piece of feedback, at least that I've gotten locally, Pete.
Well, and to that point, I know you released the podcast in terms of episode afterthoughts, but one really compelling way to engage in the show is just to listen to the episodes and not the afterthoughts. Because it makes, roughly, it's a little over an hour and it feels like it's a great way to binge, right? You get this whole story and then you can go back and do the learning part later. But I really like it because again, it feels really familiar, I feel a little bit like it's verboten to say this out. I'm going to do it anyway. It's the same feeling I get with the original Cosby Show that felt so close to my family. The things they were making fun of and laughing about and helping me laugh about were the things that were painful in my own family. And that's a real gift. It's very rare to find that.
Well, I really appreciate that, Pete. It's not, I don't know that it was, I knew we were presenting an authentic model. I had no idea that this was going to come behind it.
I don't think we could have ever predicted. I mean, I think it is understandable in the way that we did create it, because it was in every sense of the creation of it, we had someone with ADHD almost fact checking and making sure that's what happens. That's what happens, because it was me and Robin who wrote it. And Robin is, definitely ADHD. Like she is all over the place, but just a creative fire hose, and so I got to work with that and I would have different ideas and she'd be like, well, what if we did this? And I was like, yeah, sure. If that's more ADHD, definitely, I want that to be a part of this. And then having the afterthoughts be me and James, who has ADHD, every single aspect of it had almost fact checking of is this relatable to ADHD? And, so I'm glad that it came across as that kind of that genuine nature. And it really is nice to hear that it was that relatable.
I think it's relatable. And I think that, when I was listening to some of the characters going back and forth, I just know as a coach, I heard some of those things over and over and over again. And I was so curious to know what the afterthoughts were going to be. It's like, okay, how's James going to handle this? What's he going to say?
They really box themselves into a corner now.
Yeah. Well, and I keep going back to when you were talking about academics and, I work with college students as well as adults with ADHD. And I can tell you, many of the conversations start out that the colleges are not set up for ADHD. They're not ADHD friendly. And so it was really affirming to me to also hear you say there are so many details when it comes to getting a degree. So I definitely think it's relatable. I can see so many people in their cars just nodding their head. Yes, that's me.
Well, and I think that it's intriguing because I live in a little cave in South Austin, Texas. My office is this little enclave down in this little kind of garden area, and I just signed a new 5-year lease. I'm like, because it's so personal, and I actually have had a number of people that walk into my office and they're going, this is exactly like the book describes. There's the little fountain. And my wife's like, that fountain is so old, we got to get rid of it. I'm like, you can't get rid of it. It's part of the icon now.
Yeah.
It's part
of the branding.
That's right.
But I think part of that is, I have been working so close to the front lines for so many years.
Yeah.
I really wasn't checking out, is this going to work? Is this working for other people? Is this really effective? I was just trying to get clients really good functional strategies and kept increasing my skill set. And kind of a case in point with that, I have 10 local therapists in a consultation training program. That's 6 sessions, 2 hours apiece for diagnostics, all my theories, to get other people involved in what I do, right? And I am getting feedback from them that the strategies work, that these are really effective. They are helpful. So I'm getting some test runs outside of my little cave in South Austin, Texas. And, Nikki, one of the things I use a bit is an academic coaching interview form that I had to create that goes through classes and looks at, are they meeting with professors, things like this that circumvent the executive functioning of the mind. And so there's lots of people, lots of academic pieces like that to help students circumvent. But I also will tell you on the college front, we have a local university here who is beginning to do 30-minute academic coaching check-ins once a week on systems and follow-through. And so colleges are starting to really support the process in a way that's meaningful, that's not labor-intensive, and too counseling-oriented.
And can make such a difference,
Yeah.
such a difference to the students. Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely.
So what's next for you guys? You talked about a webinar. We're talking about season 2. Like, we're throwing that out there.
Yeah, just
So
What's it going to be called? The condo? The new development of single-family homes? I mean, there's a lot of room, you guys.
By tunnels.
right.
Boy, don't get us started. But
Oh, man.
I'll let you about where his future is heading in the next few months, which is really exciting. And for myself, I am finishing a video education series, which is 7 1-hour videos on all my theoretical perspectives that expands on what's in the book, that expands on what's in the afterthoughts. But you hear me really go through the process of all the different areas of ADHD and how it sets up. So someone has it for use and people can reach me in a way that they can't get to Austin. So I wanted to get my information out there just out of book form.
And that's almost like in a lecture, almost like a lecture series. So like you'll get PDF documents with the outline of how the video will be laid out, with like sections to take notes in if you'd like. And then the way that James goes about it in the video is, very structured of like, okay, why do you even care about this? Or like, here's a practical example of it. And here's like it in real life.
And why would families need to know this?
Right.
Why do professionals need to know this?
It's
so
very
it
clear.
answers questions and kind of through the process, but it's the quickest way, Nikki and Pete, that I can get people information on what I do. I'm a single individual. I love what I do. I really am not going to start a huge center and hire a bunch of people. It's just not a model that works for me neurologically, really, in business development. So the video education series is one. The other thing that I've just recently come up with, and I just started, Jules is starting to play with, I'm calling them shiny shorts. And
I'm not sure about this.
Shiny shorts.
The jury's out on that name. Let's just say.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at Jules' face as you talk about it. I see your glee. It is not shared.
Okay, so the context. Let's put the context on it. Okay, these are 30 to 45 second little videos of me talking about all the strategies I use to take care of myself. Okay, so I'm holding up for the Facebook people. This is little earth magnets that I make into all these different shapes and sizes, and it keeps me. It's a white noise part of my brain. Okay, well, that white noise would be one of those little shiny short videos that would be put out. It's just something, my mind is wanted to drive on. But I will tell you, ultimately, after the video education series, I have committed, and I have put this out to my assistant, Kim, and my wife, that I'm taking my foot off the gas for 3 months. I really have to take some time back. I've produced the book. We've gotten the podcast series. We've got the video education. I've had a lot of production on top of seeing 25 to 30 clients a week. It's been more than a full-time job. So, but that's what I'm up to, and I'll let Jules forecast his future a little bit.
Well, not so much forecast, but kind of outline it, I guess, because So I am going to be going to grad school in the fall.
Outstanding.
Yeah, so I'm taking a leaf off the old family tree. I'm going to be getting a master's of science in behavior analysis.
Oh, great.
So a lot. That's not necessarily a well-known field in psychology, but the way I like to describe it is it's essentially it's a mixture of like almost social work and clinical. So you're looking at a patient's behavior, typically someone who's autistic or who has Asperger's or something like that, and you are creating logs of their behavior, how they do it, why they do it, what triggers it, all that kind of stuff, and then setting up behavior modification techniques to change those behaviors. And it's actually really interesting because if you look at the different models that have been researched over the years, with a lot of things outside of, barring like very, very heavy trauma, with a lot of things, if you change the behavior, the emotions will follow suit. You don't have to actually go into the emotions and process those out and try and desensitize those. They will almost always follow suit with the behavior modification, which I think is really, really cool.
Well, it is really cool. And one of the things that's interesting, and this is going to be a first because Jules said, I'm going to say this. This is kind of an interesting thought. It's like, I wonder if him watching all my disruptive behavior over the making of this podcast analyzing the behavior to see what he can make sense of it.
Well, yeah.
Wait till you see the log he's been keeping, James.
That's right.
He's been running on repeat.
Yeah, you don't know. I've actually been in grad school for the last year.
I'm an active project. We have a little bit of a Truman Show going on here.
So I'm going to grad school for behavior analysis, and I eventually am planning to work with affective disorders. So that includes schizophrenia, bipolar, OCD, all different kinds of.
He's not going to take on anything challenging like I do.
No, not at all.
Mike is going to go take on, and the fun part is I think Jules is going to have the advent and the development of neuroscience as a component of this, which is a big part of this program. He's going to the University of
North Texas,
North Texas up in Denton, which is very, very well known for its counseling program. I'm super excited.
Yeah, I'm super excited, which also makes the idea of a season 2 kind of a little bit more iffy.
Christmas break.
Yeah, whatever.
Right.
You have Christmas break.
I have the mind of someone who doesn't like not finishing projects. So if you get me started, it'll get done. So it's as long as we take that first step of getting season 2 started, it'll get done eventually.
We have it all planned out. So James, you'll go on your 3-month, little vacation, which will be like over the summer and stuff. You'll start school in the fall, and then you guys will come back at the end of the year, and there you go. 2018.
I could see it happening.
Yeah,
I could see it happening.
It'll be very interesting to see where this grows because it's being listened to all over the world. We've been listens in Australia, Russia, Indonesia,
all over the place.
Thailand, Europe, you name it, and we've had listeners all over the world. So,
South America.
It's a little odd for Jules and I to get used to someone listening to our conversations, much like y'all do, right? Podcasts. Yeah. It's like, we are motivating and we are informing those. All over the world right now.
Yeah.
It's humbling. It
is very
when you get that email. It's like, wow, you guys are doing great work. When are we going to hear about your webinar series? When is that going to be out and about?
The video, and so it's actually a video education series. It was a webinar series earlier in the year.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Well, no, that's okay because I actually wrote a whole blog about realizing I had totally overamped myself. I could not do this all year, so I crunched it down into a project that I still have to finish, and I'm a little on the, back against the wall on purpose strategy. But no, the video education series is coming out in May.
Yeah.
And so it's already being pre-sold on my website. And as I'm indicating to people, this is to me, a very high value product in that you're really, really getting me and the depth of my knowledge over 30 years. You're getting everything. And that is the only way I have known to do this, is to just lay it out there. And that's what I'm doing for the therapist I'm training. And I do think next year, Nikki and Pete, that I will be putting an online training program for therapists in a consultation training model, because I really do. I want therapists to be more effective in their work with ADHD.
Yeah.
And not that it's not effective out there to some degree. I just want more information, particularly on the emotional mental stress side, and how to treat it.
I agree. I think that's the part that's probably missing the most, is dealing with that emotion, those emotional storms, and just, you can have a strategy thrown at you, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't go a little deeper, Right. And I think that's what you're doing. So that's great.
Yeah. And the deeper part is critical, Nikki, because the deeper part is where it has to come from the inside out.
Right,
And I will tell you, I was telling Jules in all the podcasts, certainly I liked episode 5 with Genius Boy, but episode 6 with Bernard, and we talk about imagination and this internal sense of safe place. And I really do, in that afterthoughts of the number 6, I really go into the details of the science of imagination, how to use it, how to strengthen it, why it's important. I still think, in my almost now 30 years of treating this, it's going to turn out to be probably the single most effective tool, because it's internal. No one else can affect it but me. I'm in charge of it.
So for people that don't know exactly what you're talking about, I know what you're talking about. I've read your book. I talk to clients about it. But can you just briefly kind of explain to people what you're talking about that maybe don't understand where you're going with that imagination?
No, and I think it's important, Nikki, because it's very easily misconstrued, and it's pushed off to the sides a lot of times. And so if you look at the science of the mind, the ability to imagine or to see or hear or feel things in your mind's eye of imagination is actually a very powerful tool. Okay? In childhood, it's very concrete. And so you're under a coffee table with a blanket over it, and suddenly you're in a castle in the forest somewhere. Okay, so it's very concrete. I can imagine myself being there under this coffee table when I'm a child. When you get into adolescence, that becomes a metacognition or a meta-thinking ability of abstract thinking. So now I can think before something happens, after it happens, and while it's happening. So I have this ability to cognitively think at a higher level. That, in the course of imagination, you are literally building an internal world in your imagination that you rely on for mental and emotional calming in yourself, confidence, courage, but we're using the science of the mind that comes out of imagination. And I explain this certainly in Focus Forward. I go into great depth on that in this 6th Afterthoughts show. But I have developed my own internal emotional safe place, is what we call it. And it's a common term in psychology to some degree. And I have a very vivid way of visualizing. So I started mine in 1986. I understood the science of it in 1989. Now I have a vast empire in my mind's eye of imagination that I rely on. Okay? So someone would say, wow, how do you use that? Is probably the most critical tool. So as I'm talking to y'all on this podcast now, the dualistic model of thinking in my mind, I can be sitting behind literally my 100-foot waterfall in my nice little meditative position, watching the water flow in front of me as I'm talking to you as a professional expert on ADHD. Well, that's a grounding force for me to remember that and think about it. And I go into it a lot more, but maybe that helps enough to understand this a little bit. I want to take the oddity off of it. And so the last thing I'll say is that I talked to Jules about maturing your imagination is what I talk about it as, learning to use it as a powerful tool. Athletes have, performers have for years in visualizing themselves. It's just a really great tool to help with the stress of ADHD. And I somewhat stumbled on it, but in research of really looking at how to help those with ADHD feel more powerful about themselves, it's a great concept to play with.
Right. Well, and I know in one of the episodes you even talk about that you have a place to go for sleep.
Yes.
Yeah, you have a safe place to go for sleep, which I think is great because I don't think that people realize that you need that safe place sometimes when you can't fall asleep.
Well, right. And that with sleep with ADHD, we have to remember to go to sleep, it takes focus to go to sleep.
Right.
And if you can't focus during the day, then it's hard to focus to go to sleep. So now I'm using this as a tie or a tether grounding element. And of course, for me, Mr. Shiny, I've got 4 sleeping environments in my emotional safe place. So I can go sleep in the rainforest. I can sleep next to the fire. I can sleep on top of the mountain.
Wherever you want to go.
Exactly. Yeah. Where do I want to sleep that night? As I get very comfortable in my real bed. But yes, that's an example of it for sure.
You know what's so great about that? Fictional cannibal Hannibal Lecter is actually wildly known to do the same thing. Thanks to author Thomas Harris. And he references the book, The Memory Palace of Matteo Ricci, which is a fantastic book that actually documents Matteo Ricci going to China to try to spread religion. And they traded him access to the people in these villages, to convert them to Christianity and taught him how to do exactly what you're talking about. It is a wonderful book. And totally worth investigating if you're a history nerd. But
what
also,
is the name of the book again, Pete?
The book is The Memory Palace of Matteo Ricci.
Yeah. And I have heard, the ideas of imagination and how to use it powerfully, and
Yeah, and that was specifically in the context of memory, right? I mean, he's using them to place these, mnemonic devices in this, facility of the mind, and but really, we're talking about Hannibal Lecter and a nice Chianti.
Well, hey, I have a question. Changing subject. Did we talk about the shiny shorts?
No.
Sure we did.
No, we did. They're little shiny shorts, like these little magnets and things like that I use. They're all my
Who's on top of things now, Nikki?
No, I tell you what, that name is going to fit. We're just going to put it in context. See, it caught Nikki's attention. It brought it back.
It did. I was thinking, did we define what that was talking about? But yeah, okay. I remember
my functional strategies on how I use or how I kind of stay connected with ADHD. And I tell you, I tried counting them one time just for a couple of days, and I had over 75. I was just, they're all over the place. It's just how I take care of myself. And I don't realize the power of it. I'm realizing the help it can give to others now because it validates, if nothing else, sometimes the little quirky things we do that feel a little strange to others, but they really work for us.
Absolutely.
That's
great.
Fantastic. Well, you know what, you guys, this has been so terrific. Thank you so much for taking all this time to sit down and talk with us about your shiny shorts and the complex. And we're very excited.
Hector or Lecter or whatever his name is.
Oh, come on.
I know he's not a good man.
Red Dragon. Come on. Anyhow, we're very excited about all this and the impending season 2, which I'm sure we'll see announcements of.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
We have been walked into it today.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. You're welcome. And don't forget, everybody, to check out James's book, Focus Forward, Navigating the Storms of Adult ADHD. And he's the founder and director of the Life Empowerment Center in Austin, Texas. And if you go to tlec.com, right?
Actually, .info or JamesOchoa.com.
JamesOchoa.com. You can do that, and it'll go right there, and you'll get all the information on James's work and this podcast, the Complex.
Absolutely.
Soon to be blowing the doors off iTunes with season 2. On behalf of James and Jules, I'm Pete Wright, and that there is Nikki Kinzer, and we will catch you next week right here on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.